wife can attest to this. We have two dogs, and Richard told me I should say they were large dogs, but they're not. They're actually fairly small dogs. In our neighborhood, we have coyotes. We live on Cape Cod, so between Boston and New York City, and coyotes. So we worry a bit about at nighttime when our dogs walk that there are coyotes about, and they have harassed people with their pets. They've even killed a dog in our neighborhood. And one night I was, we have a lot of coyotes because we also have a lot of rabbits in our neighborhood, so they're coyotes are there for a reason. And so I worried many times that our dogs would break away from their leashes at night when we walk them in the dark, and that would be horrifying to me. So one night I told my wife, who was standing right behind me, that when you put a leash on, let's wrap it. I'm going to wrap it several times around my wrist and grab it so I'm locked on. Those dogs can't get away from me. And I walked out the door at nighttime, turned to close the door, and the dogs saw a rabbit right there before I could turn around, and off went the dogs. And it's not that I held them, it's that they took me with them. It reminded me of those days when people would harpoon a whale, and to slow it down, that you would follow it in your boat, the whale would tow you. So there I was being dragged by my two giant small dogs, which my old bones didn't appreciate so much. So I'm okay. All in all, I feel great. My right leg is completely numb. My spine is like someone stabbed me with a dagger. So between the two, balances perfectly. I'll give you Planet Wasp. And we could start with that. That was a great presentation, by the way. Normally, I begin my presentations with the image of Earth because that's what I've been doing for the past, almost 50 years now, of studying that planet. And not just about the planet, but about the ocean part of the planet. That's that same image of Earth with the water, with the air stripped away. So just with clouds stripped away, so just looking down on the ocean, the Pacific Ocean. Nothing magical about that except you hardly see any land at all. It's an image you very seldom see because there's nothing for most people to see except all that blue. 70% of the planet covered by ocean, average depth about 2.5 miles, something like that. And it's always amazed me that even to this date, we've only explored a few percent. I can say 10%, it depends on what you mean by explore, but about 10% of the Earth. So we're living on an unexplored planet. And about the oceans, what we know today is that every breath of fresh air that we take, every other breath, we get that oxygen from the ocean. Most of the water that we drink, we get that fresh water from the ocean. Food, we heard, I think Richard said yesterday, 3 billion people on the planet depend upon the ocean for their food. The air we breathe, the food we eat, the water we drink, depending on that blue stuff, and we have yet to understand it. We have barely explored it, let alone discovered everything in it, so we can't even begin to understand how to live better with the ocean. We're getting there, but we've got a long way to go. That aside, no matter where you live on planet Earth, the oceans have an impact on our everyday life. Here in the beautiful Azores, we're surrounded by ocean, of course. But you could be in the middle of the United States, in Kansas, in China, in the middle of Africa, and the oceans through weather patterns, climate change, floods, droughts, all of that impacts you no matter where you live. The converse is true, no matter where you live on this planet. Whatever you put on your backyards, on the ground, and the city streets eventually makes its way down to the sea. We used to think that had only to do with oceans, with oil. Oil companies were the bad things for the ocean. Now we know about plastics. No matter where you look in the ocean, you find little bright bits of plastic. I don't know of any deep sea dive that hasn't seen some bit of plastic somewhere along the way, no matter how remote it was. So no matter where we live on Earth, we have an impact on the sea. And again, we have hardly explored this to discover what's there, so we're still lagging way behind really understanding. I'm going to say a little bit about me because I'm not an academic thoroughbred or a scholar. On the way out here, my wife said, "Why do you think they want to know about you?" And I said, well, way back in the early days of TED, I used to know the Jeff Bezoses and the Google boys, Larry Page and Sergey Brin. And we would have dinner every so often and talk about new things. I remember one day being really excited because I showed Jeff Bezos the first really interesting underwater hydrothermal vents, these hot water springs at the bottom of the ocean, and these worms that live there. We never thought there'd be life at all, and yet we find these tube worms that are 10 feet, 7 feet long. And I remember Jeff looking at it. I was very excited. He said, I never knew there weren't tube worms at the bottom of the sea. So I found myself in a position of having to explain why it was a problem before I explained why we solved the problem. So let me say a little bit about myself, about not being a thoroughbred or an academic elite, if you will. I always, through my life, wanted to be a scientist. And early on in my career, I did link up with this Marcel Proust, French writer, and his quote, the real voyage of discovery is not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. Very profound, and someone did a search on internet and found 800,000 hits on that quote, that people have used it that much. But I used to begin almost every presentation with that and end with that, and always got a round of applause, very profound, and it means a lot to a lot of different people. As a child growing up with me, I have ADD. If you haven't noticed by now, I have ADD. And to me, it was more this philosopher, Groucho Marx, who said in the Animal Crackers, well, this is a treat, your treat. How would you like to fund a scientific expedition? Groucho had his own way of being very prophetic about what it was to be a scientist, and as his role of Captain Spaulding, the African explorer. As I said, I always wanted to be a scientist, and I'm not sure why, but I think it had something to do with Galileo. I thought we were related somehow, plus I grew up during the space age in the 50s and 60s. I was president of the Math and Science Club. I was president of the Astronomy Club. I was president of the Rocketry Club. That was a triple nerddom. But I loved it. Every night I was out with my telescope when I could go out with clear skies. We had a team of people that would get together in my dining room, and we would design and build model rockets. It was fantastic. I was living what I wanted to do. And at some point, after I got through my education through elementary school, high school, it was time to apply to colleges. And I remember my guidance counselor saying, look, I have to be straightforward to you, but you should probably not bother filling out all these applications. It was like a lightning bolt hit me because kids ahead of me, I could see them excited. We're going to apply to Brown, Harvard, Yale, University of Chicago, and they pulled out my report cards. In fact, one of the worst days of my life were my two boys discovering a box in the attic with my old report cards. And they said, look, Dave, you just don't have the aptitude. And we heard that yesterday, too. You don't have the aptitude. You don't have the skill set. You don't have the academic grades to become a scientist, so you should do something else with your life. And I thought, okay. I believed them, I trusted them, certainly trusted my teachers, I trusted the guidance counselors. It didn't bother me that much because I was already out there doing those things, exploring the world and skies around me. But I was hurt by that whole thing. It did an awful lot to my pride to crush me and said, you really don't belong to this elite. So I sold shoes for 7 years, and I loved it. It was great, but I kept my interest up. Even though I had ADD, I always had a hard time taking notes. I had a really hard time reading, but I read these two books, and I read them probably more than a dozen times each. On the left, Kon-Tiki by Thor Heyerdahl, and on the right, Sherlock Holmes. And they both had similar things that they shared between them. The concept on the left, Kon-Tiki, a team of people against all odds, building a balsa raft and sailing it across the Pacific. I read that over and over and over again. The pictures just enraptured. I was just enraptured by those. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, studying, learning, getting in clues and looking at evidences and putting together stories. I love these two books. And one day while I was selling shoes, I picked up a National Geographic, and it was 1976. I was in my mid-20s. Lo and behold, there was this butterfly lady, and I loved butterflies. And so I was flipping through the book and came across that image on the right, a hand-drawn image of a mountain beneath the sea. It was written by Bob Ballard. There was a little speck on that mountain, hand-drawn, this little circle right here. That's a blow-up of the submarine Elvin. 3 people in that Elvin, including Bob Ballard. And there's something about that one image, and that one night, in that one spot, standing behind a podium like this, that threw a switch in me. It brought back all of that curiosity I used to have, that interest, that will, that drive to explore. And I took that magazine to right across the parking lot. We had the State University of New York at Albany. I was in Albany, New York. And I walked into the geology department, and just by luck ran into one of the collaborators that was on board that ship with Bob Ballard, that cruise, from which they drew that picture of that underwater map. And I just started talking to people. Instead of people telling me I didn't have the aptitude, great question. We're going to find out doing this. That's a great question, Dave. Here's this program. And it was all those things about Sherlock Holmes and Kon-Tiki, working with a team, working against all odds, looking at the clues, coming up with a solution that gave me the confidence to go back to school, which I did do. That was 1976, and 2 years later, I got my bachelor's degree, and I made my first dive in Elvin, which you see here on the left. That was in the Pacific. So that was very quick. I didn't get suddenly brighter, smarter, but I got driven I was driven by that one image. On the right, you see me later on. Bob Ballard, after I got my PhD, invited me to join him at Woods Hole as part of his team. And there I am on the right. There's Bob leaning forward. I always said he did that so he could say he saw everything first, because he was that much closer to the monitor. So there he was. But there we are together. That's the Mediterranean. And at the same time, all these things happened right at the right time, right place, right time. When I went back to school, this map, created by Dr. Bruce Hazen and Marie Tharp, had just been released, Map of the World's Ocean. And again, just like that hand-drawn underwater image, this is a hand-drawn map of the world, glorious, because it shows the floor of the oceans, not as this flat, mud-covered world, but it's got the greatest mountain range on it. I'll show you even closer. There's the Atlantic Ocean. And we're right here, the Azores. This underwater mountain range, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, dwarfs any other mountain range on the planet. It's just a few hundred miles from where we're sitting. In fact, we are on a piece of the mid-ocean ridge, on the flanks of the ridge. So 50,000 miles long. It's got thousands of these valleys that crisscross it that are many, many times deeper and wider than any valley we have on land. It's got underwater rivers, the currents that flow, like the Gulf Stream. I'll show you a little bit about that to the north, come back cold and hug the bottom. So it's got underwater rivers, where those rivers flow over topography like here. I think I've got another map that shows, there we go, even better. So here we are in the Azores. Here's that mid-ocean ridge. The Gulf Stream comes up this way, loses its heat as a shallow current, or shallow water river, really. Drops its heat off and comes back south as a bottom-hugging current. We've got places like this, the Straits of Gibraltar. If you close that off, this water evaporates fairly quickly, which removes salt from the oceans, which makes the oceans less salty, which makes sea level drop, which changes the chemistry globally. So all of these things, just even in the North Atlantic, says a couple things. The most important thing is that this planet has always been changing. That one first photo I showed of Earth is a snapshot. And on every scale in time and space, planet's kind of always changing. Face of the Earth is changing, plate tectonics, climate's changing, climate change. I want to show you the Gulf Stream again, because because with climate change, we're looking at how sensitive the climate really is. The red here, because the Earth moves water around, and with the water it carries heat and cold. But let's see if we start this. How do we start it? Here we go. So the red is the Gulf Stream in the Atlantic, taking heat from the equator, from the Gulf of Mexico up north. It keeps England and Ireland green. You see the winds blowing across warm water, pick up humidity and heat, and drop it onto the land as rainfall. So what's happening now is that we've got enough water, this is carrying enough humidity to the north that in terms of rain and river runoff, the North Atlantic's becoming less and less salty. So it doesn't want to sink, because for this to work, you've got to have water sinking. That's the pump that makes it work. So when that happens, the water can't move to the north, so no warm water here. The winds blow across dry and cold. And so the Eastern Atlantic, or Europe, starts to look more like than Labrador, than what it looks like today. How much time have we got? 3 minutes? Great. Okay, Titanic. I tried to avoid Titanic when I went to work with Bob Ballard. It's not something I was interested in, but the cover of the book, back to these hand-drawn pictures, captivated me for years. I had this picture over my desk for a year since I was in academics, because I wanted to make that image. And it was impossible with the technology we had at the time. We could do that, but you had no idea that beyond that was an entire ship. Here's that same picture with a robot over the side of the Titanic looking at the hull. But that's about it again. Once again, you couldn't see the ship itself. But today we've come a long way. That's the boiler that first showed people that this was Titanic. That's what it used to look like, this gray-blue image. That's what it looks like today. With photogrammetric mapping, imaging, and LiDAR, we have that now today. We've mapped the entire site of Titanic. So here's the ship up here, the bow. Here's the stern down here. And the area in between is a debris field with hundreds of thousands of items in it. And then finally, we're getting to that goal I've always had, was to build that model, but to build it in digital form. So this is that same bow after that same image. We're finally in a spot where we can do that. And in about 2 weeks' time, we'll be co-leading an expedition out to Titanic to finish the job, to do the whole ship with this kind of imagery. Quickly back to the quote by Marcel Proust. That's not what he meant, the way that most people take this, that you should look at the world with other eyes. It works, it's a great idea, but he was talking about artists. And that's his full quote on the bottom, which is much more elaborate. And people have said to me in the past, well, you got that quote wrong, Dave, your entire career. That's not exactly what he meant, although it does work for me. And I have to tell them I'm not a Proust scholar, even though that's what I'm a lot known for that quote. But instead, I got that quote from a Mary Engelbrecht greeting card. So I cheated a little bit. So I want to leave you with this. The oceans, and Richard touched on this earlier, technology, observation is the cornerstone of understanding and of science. And science discovery comes before understanding. And in the ocean, the drive to explore is important, but what makes it possible is technology. And the new technologies, the new cameras, the new lights, the new navigation, make it possible now for us to explore the oceans in a way we never could do before. And so with time, there's a lot of growing exploration that the oceans are becoming open to exploration by more and more people. And we'll finally start to put this puzzle together about how the world works and how we live better inside it. Thank you very much.